Hey guys, you've spent the last day in class taking a look at the case of Sam Smiley. I want to take a couple minutes today to just kind of talk about why we did this activity and why a detective's work is a lot like the work of a historian. At any point in this presentation, feel free to pause it so you can think about some of the questions that I'm asking as we go. So just take a couple minutes right now to kind of reflect on the case of Sam Smiley that you just did. What do you think happened to Sam Smiley? And what was the most helpful or useful evidence to help you determine that outcome? Was there anything in your investigation that wasn't useful? And finally, what further clues or evidence would help you better understand what happened to Sam Smiley? Would there have been something that would have been helpful that you wish you would have had? So these are just some reflection questions. Go ahead and pause for a second and just kind of think about those. All right, so I want to take a minute and describe how historians are really like detectives. History is not simply about events. It involves looking at events, but also trying to understand why they happened and the motivations behind those who committed the events or who participated in the events. And so just like a detective investigates how a crime was committed in the past, a historian looks at past events and attempts to draw conclusions or arguments. So really, a historian is like a detective doing work trying to investigate maybe a crime, an event, and they ask the same questions a detective asks: what happened, why did it happen, and what happened as a result. So this year in history class, we are going to be doing a lot of detective work, which is really the work of historians. And as we go through this, we are going to be using a lot of the same skills and a lot of the same sources that historians use. For example, we're going to talk a lot this year about primary sources. Primary sources are clues. So when you were doing your investigation of Sam Smiley, you looked at a lot of clues. Those are called primary sources. So to figure out what happened, a historian uses these sources. These are sources that were created at the time of the event in which you are studying. So that could be something like diaries, documents, letters, maybe it's video footage from that time. And when a historian examines a primary source, they ask questions like, who created this document? Who is the audience of this document? And what is the purpose of this document? So you have to examine that to have a better understanding of the event. So I want you to think for a second, what primary sources did you come across when you investigated Sam Smiley? Historians also use a lot of recall, right? History is what we choose to remember about the past. It's not actually like what happened. We weren't there, so we don't know exactly what happened. So we have to kind of trust people's recall of the event. And remember, not everyone recalls events the same. People remember an event differently based on how they perceive it. So part of the job of a historian is to sort through these different perceptions to try and figure out what actually happened. So if you think about the case of Sam Smiley, people recalled the events slightly differently. So how did you use recall in Sam Smiley? Historians also do a lot of inference skills, and you're going to do this a lot in history class this year. This is where historians have to make guesses about the past, and they do this by reading between the lines, right? So an inference is a conclusion we come by analyzing information. It might not be spelled out obvious to us, but we're able to kind of read in between the lines and make educated guesses to figure out the past. So if you think about that, you definitely made inferences in Sam Smiley. So think for a minute, what is one example of how you used an inference when you went about the case of Sam Smiley? Another skill you're going to hear your teachers talk a lot about this year is analysis, is analyzing. History involves figuring out really complicated situations. And so when we analyze in history, we examine the evidence to understand the past, and we critically examine each piece of evidence. We break it down, right? So you might be looking at 8 different pieces of evidence that are telling you different things, and you have to look at each individual one and analyze it to draw a conclusion about what happened. So you did a lot of analyzing in Sam Smiley. Can you think about a time where we used analysis, or how you broke down complicated situations in examining Sam Smiley? You're also going to hear a lot about evaluating, because history involves making lots of judgments about people and events. So historians need to evaluate the quality or the importance of evidence and sources, because as a historian, you might get a source where you're like, this has nothing to do with what I'm looking at. Well, you have evaluated that source. You have made a judgment that that source is not valuable to you. Likewise, you might look at a source and say, oh my gosh, this tells me exactly what I need to know. So you have evaluated that source. And in looking at the case of Sam Smiley, there were some sources that were useful and some that weren't. So think about how did you evaluate in Sam Smiley? And finally, so we've learned all these different kind of meanings. These are the different skills you're going to use in history this year. You've actually, you've done it. If you figured out what happened to Sam Smiley, you can do all these history skills that we're going to be doing this year. But we want to see it in a detective report. So now you need to write that final report. So by analyzing, breaking down the witnesses' recall, what they choose to remember, and making inferences, those educated guesses about the clues, evaluate, so make a judgment about what happened to Sam Smiley. AKA, we're asking you to explain what happened. What happened to Sam Smiley? You need to be specific. You need to use every source that you can. We're requiring at least 5 sources. Again, let's take a look at this assignment together. Use the evidence you find, write a detailed report making a claim about what happened to Sam Smiley. The claim must have been based on evidence. So you cannot claim that he fell off a cliff if he's not by a cliff. Okay, I know it might be fun to make up these stories, but we're not asking you to make up a story. We're asking you to use the evidence and say what happened to Sam Smiley. The report also should include specific textual evidence from at least 5 sources. So you should be citing 5 sources in your example, and you should include an introduction and conclusion sentence. So we're going to look at 2 examples before you get to work writing your detective report. Example 1. I think the cab driver killed him and lied about it all, and he didn't really pay the guy. So there's a lot wrong with this example. There is no evidence cited. It is only 1 sentence. There's no introduction sentence. There's no conclusion sentence. This one's really struggling. So don't do this. Let's take a look at this one. Claim. After examining the evidence, it is clear that Sam Smiley was hit and run over by a car. Okay, that's the claim. Now we have to examine the evidence and make sure that they are citing their evidence, they are being detailed, they've used 5 sources, and this is plausible, could have actually happened. On the night of his death, Sam Smiley attended the Smelly Feet concert. According to Adam Evening, after the Smelly Feet concert ran from 8:30 to 11, Sam was waiting with Adam at the bus stop. However, Sam left the line to go get a hot dog. According to Mrs. Smiley, Sam did not have a lot to eat for dinner. Therefore, he was hungry following the concert. He got out of line for the bus stop and got to get a hot dog. He told Adam to go on without him. However, Adam stated because he got the hot dogs, he missed the bus, so he had to call a taxi. Unfortunately, he realized he didn't have enough money to get all the way home. The receipts in Sam's wallet indicate that he spent all of his money earlier shopping, buying clothing, a movie ticket, and a Smelly Feet CD. Henry Ford, the driver, told us he took him as far as he could go, about a mile from the corner of Windy Lane and South Street, for the $6 he had left. While he walked home, he tripped on a pothole because he couldn't see where he was walking due to there being no streetlights, which we learned from Mr. David Banner. While he lay on the side of the road completely unaware, a car came through, tried to swerve around the body, and this can be seen from the swerve marks on the map. However, they swerved too late, ran him over, and in fear, they fled the crime scene. Okay, this one is so much better. There's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of detail, street names, saying exactly where the source came from, detailing what happened throughout the day. This is like near perfect. There's one issue with this. It does say that he tripped on a pothole. I don't know if you picked that up on that, but there is nowhere in the evidence that says that. So that would be
stop working, come to the office.
That would be the only major issue with this one. So you can use this as a reference. Please do not copy and paste this or copy, the exact response. That's plagiarism. But we want you to see this as a model of kind of what we're looking for with your report. So your work for today is to work on this report, finish it, and Dropbox it to Schoology by the due date.